Hey there, everybody. Brad Geiger here with another episode of Webcomics Confidential. And today's topic is one that was written in by a webcomics.com member that wanted me to talk about books, specifically the typical mistakes that a web cartoonist makes with his or her first book, doing the first book, getting it out there, as it were. I always like that term, getting it out there. When people talk about getting their webcomic out there or a book out there, to me, it denotes a real lack of understanding of the business that they're in. When we talk, how do I get my work out there? How do I get my name out there? It's not about getting it out there. But you can put a product on a shelf. That is not, and that gets the product out there. The actual definition of success for that product is going to happen way before you put it on the shelf. It's going to go into the quality of the product. You knew I was going to say that. And market research. Is this a product that people want? And there's a good little preface for where we're going to go with this conversation. So, but yeah, every time I hear somebody saying about getting their name out there, getting the book out there, getting their comic out there, it tells me they really don't understand what they're talking about. So here's number one. The number one biggest mistake that web cartoonists do when getting their first book out there is deciding to do a book in the first place. The actual honest truth is 9 chances out of 10, nobody's looking for this book. And that means that they haven't done the market research first. Now, what do I mean by that? Okay. Long before you do your first book, I would like to see you do a couple e-comics, do a couple smaller 99-cent level stuff to see if your readers are active and engaged. Are they jumping at the stuff that you're throwing at them? Are they interested in getting more deeply involved in your comic? Or is this something that they're just in a tepid relationship with? So the first thing you want to do is kind of gauge interest with a couple of smaller items. And number two, if you do decide to do your first book, I strongly recommend making that first book a print-on-demand book. I would not invest a large amount of money in my first book of any project. I'll put that sucker out on print-on-demand where there's no real skin in the game, no real profits either. But now I can start to see whether people are interested in what I'm doing. I can see if the fish are biting a little bit. Once I get beyond that point and I've decided that there is a certain level of interest, now I've got to take that thing to Kickstarter and really do the make or break market research. And you've heard me here say it before. Kickstarter is market research. This is something that you put it out there, and by all means, before you do your Kickstarter, there are tons of there's tons of resources on webcomics.com. Hit that search engine over there on the right-hand column and put the word Kickstarter in there. You'll see a whole bunch of stuff. Read through that stuff. There are so many pitfalls in doing a Kickstarter. And when you start dealing with other people's money, and that's really what you're doing with a Kickstarter, you've got other people who are giving you their money and they expect a certain thing. Holy cats, if you screw up, if you're not counting your costs right, if you're not accommodating for the 10% cut that Kickstarter is going to take, if you're not doing your Kickstarter math, you are setting yourself up for a huge, huge problem down the line. If you're not accounting for shipping correctly, that's a big one. This is all stuff that leads to real problems down the line. So before you even get to that point, do some reading on webcomics.com and find out about the right way to do a Kickstarter. But okay, you've done all that. You've done a couple of 99-cent e-comics. You're ready to go. When you do that Kickstarter, accept the fact that this really is, in the truest sense, market research. People are voting with their dollars. Are they interested in the thing you're buying? If they're not, you know what I'm going to say next. Either you're not ready for the market or the market's not ready for you, and you accept that decision. Go back and retool and rethink, and this is the time for you to put some real honest thought into what you're doing. Accept what your readers are telling you. They're always telling you something. Accept what they're telling you. And if it is that we're not interested in this book you're doing, then take that information and use it in a positive, creative way. Now, here's what you don't do. I'm sitting there in Seattle, Emerald City Comic Con. Guy comes up to me with his wife, and he's talking to me about his comic that he's doing, and it's over on Indiegogo. So I go, why are you doing Indiegogo? He goes, well, we did a Kickstarter, but that didn't fund, and then I didn't get any money. So I'm going to do it on Indiegogo now, and that way any money I do make, I get to keep. I said, okay, that makes sense. I go, how much does this thing cost? How much is it going to cost to print this and get it out to your readers? He says $5,000. I go, okay. So what happens if you only make $2,000 in your Indiegogo campaign? And he kind of pauses like he hadn't even considered it, even though the first Kickstarter didn't go. And he says, well, if that happens, then I guess I got to go out of pocket. I go, you're going to go out of pocket for something that your readers have already told you on Kickstarter that they don't want, and now they will have told you on Indiegogo that they don't want, and you're going to take this thing that has a terrible market standing, and you're going to go out of pocket to the tune of maybe $3,000 to make this thing happen? I turned to his wife. I'm really surprised I didn't get punched in the teeth. I turned to his wife and I go, do you handle the money at home? And she says, no. I go, maybe you should. Holy cats. I would not want this person to be handling my personal funds, resources, if I was in a relationship. This is somebody who should not be handling the family checkbook. I'm not so sure he should be driving a car. Here's the deal. If somebody walked up to you and said, I got this new yo-yo, right? And I'm going to sell it on this, and here's your chance to invest in this yo-yo. The first thing you'd say is, what's your market research? What have you done? Are people willing to buy this yo-yo? Oh, yeah, we've done testing groups. It tests at about 30%. 30% of the yo-yo buying public want to buy our yo-yo. Are you going to invest a whole lot of money into something that's 30%? I mean, it's something. It's something. And I guess you could reason that if the yo-yo buying public is large enough, that 30% of a really large number is going to be significant. I don't know that the yo-yo buying public is large enough to make that a worthwhile investment. And I know that this guy's readership is not going to be large enough that 30% return on investment on these books that he's doing is going to do anything but give him a credit card bill that he can't keep up with the monthly payments on. You don't go out of pocket for a book. Not in today's day and age. Not in today's day and age. You don't go out of pocket for this stuff. What you do is you put that sucker out on KeenSpot and you take your lumps. And if you don't, again, I don't believe in the word fail when it comes to Kickstarter. If that Kickstarter doesn't fund, you take that information and use your creative mind to take that information and process it in a positive way. Rethink what you're doing. Use your creativity. This is your chance for growth. Yeah, I know it sucks to have a Kickstarter that doesn't fund. I know it's no fun. I know nobody wants to have a Kickstarter that doesn't fund. I know you have feelings of failure. That's fine. Take a couple days, process that grief, and then put your big person pants on and get back out there and start swinging. But do listen to your readers when they say, this isn't really what I want. All right? Process that in a creative way. So, those are your first two real big mistakes that most web cartoonists make. They're not gauging market research, and quite frankly, they're using Indiegogo and getting only partial funding for this thing and going out of pocket for the rest, and that's never a good idea. If you have cleared those hurdles, let's say you've got a strong demand for this book. People want this book, and this is beyond like one reader in your comment section saying, "Oh, I would totally buy that book." Go back to webcomics.com. Search for a post I did there that said "Readers Lie." Every product I've ever done, like going back in the days, Cafe Press T-shirts and all this other crap that we did back in the early 2000s. There was always one reader who said, "Oh, I would totally buy that on a shirt. Totally, I would be the first." And as soon as I put that out there, crickets, nothing. I guarantee you, the first reader that says that he or she is going to buy your merchandise is the first person to disappear when you put that up for sale on your site. You don't listen to a reader, you listen to all the readers, all right? And that's the difference between making a t-shirt decision or a book decision by going down your comments thread and doing a Kickstarter or doing a couple small products like e-comics and so forth to gauge interest and then build your way up. So let's say you've crossed all of those hurdles and you've actually got some demand, and you're gonna, and your Kickstarter, let's say in this hypothetical, your Kickstarter has funded. All those other things have fallen into place. Here are the mistakes that most people have fallen from. These are the mistakes that happen that you should be trying to avoid right now before you even do your first Kickstarter. Number one, they failed to plan for print in the first place. All right. So if you're not processing your comics in high res and saving a master file that's high res, and if you're not processing those colors for CMYK, if you're working in RGB without a CMYK preview, you're setting yourself up for a lot of hardship when it comes time to do a book. Those images have to be at least 300 DPI. And by the way, we always get into this. DPI, PPI, same thing. Those images have to be at least, for color or grayscale, at least 300 DPI. I like to do mine in 400 DPI just to kind of give them a little extra insurance. And if it's just black and white line art, I go as high as 600 DPI. Some books I've worked on, the images were black and white line art, and I did them at 900 DPI. And you can go in, again, webcomics.com has excellent resources in processing all of those image files. But you also have to make sure you're working in CMYK, or at least in a CMYK preview. That means that you can work in RGB, because I know a lot of Photoshop filters only work in RGB, and a lot of colorists prefer working in RGB. If that's the case, go over there and set up that CMYK preview, because the fact of the matter is RGB has millions and millions of colors that are possible, and CMYK only has like 100,000 or so. There's a huge difference between the number of hues that you can get in RGB and the number of hues that are possible in a straight CMYK setup. So what? And the obvious example right there, in RGB, 100% green is unprintable in CMYK. It is a hue that you cannot get in print without specialty inks. Okay, so you immediately get into a situation, if you don't have your CMYK preview on, or if you're not just working in native CMYK, you end up with colors that you can't reproduce in print. That's a big, big problem. And especially if your main character has one of those RGB 100% green shirts on, and that's what he's known to have. That's part of his character. When you translate that into CMYK, that becomes a very muddy green. There's nothing that even is very close to it. Okay, so so what you should be doing today, if you just started your webcomic last Thursday, you should be working with a high-res master file that you dial down to low-res, make a save as, make a second copy of that. That gets put up on the web, and you save that high-res master file for later on when you do go to print, and working in CMYK instead of RGB. And again, if you do work in RGB, turn on that CMYK preview so you're not creating unprintable colors. Okay? Here's the next big mistake that web cartoonists make: failing to plan for distribution or retail sales. Okay? So if you do get to the point that you've done everything that we've talked about up until now, and you've done your market research and your Kickstarter funded, all this stuff, if all that stuff is true, if all that stuff holds water, there's every reason to believe that you should be able to do well in distribution. Now, let's stop. Let's put a pause there, because Diamond Comics Distribution did something really interesting, and I got to go back and look up the date, but I'm going to say this happened as far back as like 2006, 2008. This was a while ago, where they said that they were going to establish a quota for all independent comics producers. And if you put something out on Diamond and it didn't meet that quota, they were just going to cancel the order. And it scared away a lot of us. Well, it scared away me. I wasn't going to do that. That's as bad as Indiegogo, in my opinion. The comic book shops are going to order my book to put on their shelf, and if I don't meet the quota, all of a sudden the order's canceled. Screw that. I don't need any part of that. They quietly, and again, I've got to go back and look, but to the best of my knowledge, they quietly rescinded that. But in the meantime, it scared a lot of people, a lot of low-level people, out of putting their stuff out on Diamond Books. So don't automatically discount Diamond, is what I'm saying. Reach out to Diamond if you've got a book. Find out. They've got contacts over there. Find out what it would take for you to get your book on Diamond distribution. It's actually going to be a little bit more attainable than you've been led to believe. Okay? And that being the case, when you do your book, you should be planning for distribution or retail sales. And the two are hand in hand, obviously. The distributors deliver them to retailers, and your book needs certain things on that cover so that it can be sold in that setting. All right, we're going to talk more about this, but the headline here is your book needs an ISBN and your book needs a barcode on the back cover, and that barcode needs to incorporate the retail price. Now, this is where we get really serious about this thing, because as you're putting your book together, as you're printing it, you have to print that retail price on there, and that involves a whole basket of apples that we haven't even got to yet. For now, let's talk about the ISBN. There's only one place to get an ISBN. Don't buy it anyplace else. CreateSpace, we had a whole argument about that a long time ago here on webcomics.com, and I researched and found out that CreateSpace does give you actual verifiable ISBNs. That's the one asterisk. I will allow you to go to CreateSpace and get your ISBN. No place else but Bowker. R.R. Bowker and Associates is the only place that you can buy an actual ISBN. Other people sell them, but then you may not be listed as the publisher. There may be all kinds of other problems that crop up from it. The good news is Bowker's very easy to buy from. The bad news is, last time I checked in on them, either you bought like one ISBN for an outrageous price, or you had to buy a pack of 10 for like $250, somewhere in there, $200 or so. But that's okay, because if you're getting this for the long run, then you're going to be using those ISBNs. It's not a big deal. So do get your ISBN. Get that ISBN, and then incorporate the ISBN into the barcode along with a retail price. And there's all kinds of ways you can build that barcode. I think I spent $20 or so and got a barcode software that I use all the time. Nice little tax write-off. Really, I use it 3 or 4 times a year. It's great. But get something that you can put an actual barcode on that back cover, because if your book does not have an ISBN, and if it doesn't have a barcode, it's going to be impossible for that to be handled by a distributor. They're not going to be able to take it, or it's going to take a whole lot of manual labor on your part, and the ROI is going to be way, way down. So do get, if you are at that point where your Kickstarter is funding, get an ISBN, get a barcode on that book, and set a retail price. That's the last topic I want to talk about today. The big mistake that people make when they do their first book. They don't set their price right. If you are setting your price on your graphic novel based on looking at what Marvel and DC price their graphic novels at, you're making a huge mistake, because Marvel and DC are printing tens of thousands of their graphic novels. They've got huge deals with printers, because printers know that if they land that deal, they've got work coming in for ages. So the unit cost of that book, of that Marvel Comics graphic novel, for example, the unit cost is a fraction of what your unit cost is. Let's take a little pause there and define what unit cost is. Let's say that I'm going to print 300 books, and it's going to cost me $3,000 to do it. That means I've got a unit cost of $10 a book. That's the cost, the total cost, divided by the total number of units gives you the unit cost. If it takes me $3,000 to get 300 books, then each one of those books cost me $10. And that's oversimplified, because your unit cost has to take in other variables as well. It's got to take in the total cost of shipping that you're doing. It's got to take in it's got to take in a fraction of that barcode software. It's going to take in the cost of the ISBN. It's got to be the total cost, not just the printing, but the total cost of doing that project has got to be what you base your unit cost on. That means that once you've done all you've done all your math, and you know exactly what it's going to cost to do this product, then you divide that total cost by the total number of units, and now you know what each unit cost to produce. Your retail price has to be higher than the unit cost, or else you lose money. The amount by which the unit price is over the unit cost is called the profit, or unit profit in this case. You need to make a profit to stay in business. Don't do what I did. All right, my first book, Evil Inc. Volume 1. There's another one. Here's a little tangent. Just pardon me for a second while I go off on a tangent. Never use a year in your title. The first Evil Inc. book was called Evil Inc. Annual Report 2015, which I thought was brilliant because all of the comics in that book was from 2015. Guess what happened in 2016? Nobody wants to buy a book that says 2015 in 2016. They know that they'll go to the next guy, they'll go in a comic convention on the next table over there, and they'll buy that guy's book, and they know that it's got comics from 2015 in it, but they don't want it to say it on the cover. He was smart. He named his Sheldon 3 Hugs for Pugs or whatever, and he's selling out the nose. Me, I'm sitting there with Evil Inc. Annual Report 2015 because nobody wants 2015 in 2016, or God help us, in 2017. Okay? So don't put a year on your book. Just don't do it. It's going to kill you later on. So, and by the way, I think I totally misspoke. I'm older than that. The first book was called Evil Inc. Annual Report 2005. that was a whole 10 years earlier than that. But anyway, you see what I'm saying. Don't put a year in your book. So, failing to set a price properly. Once you set that, once you know what your unit cost is, and you've factored in all the variables, you know what your unit cost is. Now you set that unit price so that you have a profit. Sounds easy, right? Oh, stop just for a minute. Because what you're going to say is, well, I'll take $1 a book, maybe $2 a book. You're still not thinking right. Okay? What if you do decide to go to distribution? What does that entail? I'll tell you what it entails. It means that Diamond is going to buy those books from you at 65% off the cover price. So now your unit profit has to be big enough so that when 65% is taken off the cover price, there's still a profit left over. Now we're getting into algebra. Anybody that told you that artists don't need math was full of shit. This involves algebra now. Now you have to decide how high is my unit price got to be so that when you take 65% off of it, it's still higher than the unit cost. And I know I've been throwing you over to webcomics.com all day. I'm going to do it one more time. You can see the algebra, and it's actually pretty simple. You can see the mathematical process that you need to do in a webcomics.com post. I think I called it price setting or something like that. But do a search over there for retail price, and you will find a step-by-step explainer. And I built it. This one has tons of visual aids because I built it to be used at my entrepreneurship class at Hushen School of Art, where I teach a couple of different classes. I really put a lot of time into doing this because I was working with some younger kids there that were really struggling with this concept. And I came up with a couple of ways to visualize it that I think were useful. So now you've got to make that retail price high enough so that when you take 65% off that cover price, you still have a profit. That's a whole nother can of worms. Now, I know what you're saying. Yeah, I said algebra. Your blood ran cold, and you said, "Screw that! I ain't doing that, Geiger. Forget you. I'm not doing any of that." And besides, you're saying I'm probably not going to do distribution, and that's going to make my retail price too high. And I say to you, dum-dum, that price on the cover, if you're not doing distribution, if you're not putting it into retail stores, that price on the cover is just a number, dummy. And listen, this again, use your creative mind. This works in your favor as well. Okay, so let's say that everything that you just used to justify not doing math is going to come true. And you followed my advice, and your book is now $25 a book, because at $25 a book, you can take 65% off of that and still have a profit. Fair enough? And it turns out that you were right all along. Diamond doesn't want to carry your book or whatever, and you're not going to do distribution, and your book is not going to be in retail stores. And now you've got this book that you've got to sell at $25. Who's selling that book? You are. If it's not being carried by distributors, you're the only one left who's selling it at conventions, I would imagine, and on your site. And at the end of the day, you control what your price is. So you can take your book that is marked at $25 and say, hey, I've got a special deal for my readers, just for you. You can't get anyplace else. I'm going to take this book that's $25 and I'm going to sell it to you guys on this site for $15 because I'm such a swell guy, or I'm such a swell gal. Nothing's stopping you. All right? As long as you're still making a profit, you can sell on your own owned things, your online store, the stuff that you own. You are the one that decides what that price is. And now that you've put $25 on that book, that becomes a milestone. That becomes a way that readers gauge the value of that book. They are getting a book that's valued at $25, but they're getting it at such a deal from you because you're giving it for $15, and everybody loves to get a deal. Now they're getting something that's worth, because you determine the worth, they're getting something that's worth $25 for only $15. They're going to hit that buy button every time. If they're anywhere near inclined to pick that book up, they're going to hit that buy button, and you're going to make your sale. And if $15 still allows you to clear a unit cost and with some profit, you win. You are not locked into selling that book at $25 on your online store. In fact, it makes you look like a big shot because you're giving your readers a special deal. Win-win. But none of that is possible unless you do a little bit of planning, okay? So do the work in setting your retail price and realize that that number is, at the end of the day, just a number. And as long as you're keeping your math in the back of the head and making sure that you're clearing your unit cost with the price that you finally end up putting on that book, you win. Okay? So those are the big mistakes that I see people making with their books. It starts with respecting the Kickstarter. It starts with listening to that market research. And we've talked about that plenty of time. And then it goes to going out of pocket, not planning for print with high-res and CMYK, not planning for distribution with ISBNs and barcodes, and finally failing to set price properly. This is Brad Geiger. This one, I'm telling you, go over to webcomics.com and do some reading. I've got tons of research, tons of resources that is going to make this so much easier for you to do. But you gotta look them up and you gotta read them. You gotta cram that stuff into your cranium because man, oh man, if it doesn't, it's going to bite you in the keister one way or the other. So let's end that there on that glowing visualization. This is Brad Geiger. Go to webcomics.com. Hit the comments. Tell me what you think. If you've got questions, that's a great place to ask them. And if you have suggestions for future topics, by all means, drop me a line. Hit the contact button over at webcomics.com. Drop me an email. Go over there to the comments and hit them there. You guys have been suggesting great topics, and this was one of them. So if you've got something you'd like to hear a little bit more about, let me know. Until then, I'll see you next time.